Good morning, everybody. The Morgan Oger Foundation. What is the Morgan Oger Foundation? And I didn't know. And it informs this story, so we're going to find out. Their front page says, Equality and Justice. We work to diminish the gap between the federal and provincial law of Canada and its application through education, advocacy, and participation in legal interventions. Okay, and there I'm going to their Our Work. And so I just went to this link here. If you want to read it, link is in the description. It says more about our work. The Morgan Oger Foundation is a small volunteer-driven organization entirely run and funded by people who care about justice and inclusion, like you. We focus on opportunity to reduce prejudice-driven inequality in Canada a few projects at a time and pride ourselves with a 100% success rate to date. We are working on several initiatives where we feel we can best help change things for the better. ... And on the right-hand side here, it says, Morgan Oger Foundation applauds Oger v. Whatcott BC Human Rights Tribunal, setting limits on publishing hatred. The Morgan Oger Foundation agrees with today's BC Human Rights Tribunal decision. The protections of freedom of expression and freedom of religion set out in the Canadian Charter of Rights have limits. Publishing material which refuses to recognize a transgender woman as a woman and incites hatred or discrimination on that basis is prohibited under Section 7 of the BC Human Rights Code. And another one is on gender identity. Morgan Oger Foundation applauds City of Vancouver putting inclusion first. Morgan Oger Foundation applauds City of Vancouver putting inclusion first for VRR March 14 direct social services grant program decisions. City funds rape relief for 2019, quote, to avoid service disruption, declares VRR ineligible for all future grants until it meets inclusion criteria. The Oger Foundation urges the city to ensure that public funds never be accessible to organizations that do not adhere to the funding agency's inclusion criteria. This is essentially allowing, from what I understand, allowing somebody who identifies as a trans man, regardless of their genitalia, to access women's shelters. This, in my opinion, puts women at risk, as there could be potentially men who are lying to gain access to it. Okay? Here's why this matters. Maxime Bernier's tweeting, quote, I wonder what @Michelle Rempel thinks of the story about the BC father who could be arrested for family violence if he refers to his daughter as a girl. Does she support free speech and parental rights? She seems to be pretty aligned with the far left transgender activism. And this is Morgan Oger, and this is Michelle Rempel speaking at a Morgan Oger Foundation event, it looks like. And so that's concerning from a policy standpoint, as Morgan Oger, the foundation, says specifically that they're attempting to influence Canadian law. Right? We work to diminish the gap between federal and provincial law of Canada and its application through education, advocacy, and partnership in legal interventions. That would, in my opinion, be a policy question. Okay? In my opinion, how much do you support this organization's push to normalize transgenderism and include it in I'm not sure. As in this example, they're pushing for inclusion criteria to be extended to women's shelters, etc. And I mean, again, this puts people at risk. So this is a policy question, as hard a policy question as you can get. And the Conservatives have a solid answer to Mr. Bernier. Delete your account. Delete your account? Delete your account? Why? No debate, Lisa Rait? No minutia? Absolutely no details, nothing to get into here? There's nothing about this tweet that has any merit, you think? That's interesting, Ms. Rait, because as I've just pointed out, the Morgan Oger Foundation is interested in changing Canadian laws and pushing transgender as, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what their end goal is, but they're certainly trying to push Canadian laws to make agencies or anybody reliant on government grants to have inclusion criteria that potentially puts people at risk. Interesting, right? And they're also trying to limit free speech granted to you in the Constitution and the Canadian Charter of Rights. They're trying to say some speech is hate speech and you can't say that. Right? And some speech being hate speech is calling a biological woman a woman if that biological woman identifies as a man. That would be hate speech? I think maybe there's a policy question here, Ms. Rait. I think maybe deleting Mr. Bernier's account doesn't make that policy question go away. Mr. Bernier responded, which I think was kind of funny. Maxime Bernier says, quote, "The Conservative Party does have a detailed policy platform after all to compete with ours. Here it is. Delete your account." Right. That's in response to that. And then Lisa Rait responds again, and I'll click over here because it's easier. She says, "Your tweet was about Michelle, not about policy. Talk about policy all you want, but you and I both know this shot was about an individual within the party." Let's go back and look. I just want to make sure that we're not missing Mr. Bernier's savage attack on Michelle Rempel. He says, quote, "I wonder what @Michelle Rempel thinks of the story about the BC father who could be arrested for family violence if he refers to his daughter as a girl. Does she support free speech and parental rights? She seems to be pretty aligned with the far left transgender activism." Miss Rait, how and in what way does that attack Michelle Rempel? Why do you think that it does? And why do you think it's an appropriate response to tell Max to delete his account? Why do you think silencing him is a way to solve the policy question that Max brought up? As I was walking around this morning, more Twitter interactions happened, and so this is my video this morning. It's fantastic. Mr. Bernier responds, quote, "Don't give me that whiny BS. You and I both know it's about the CPC having become a centrist party in order to replace the Liberals. You keep pandering to every special interest groups, dairy cartels, Islamists, radical feminists." Sorry about that. The horn kept going. I'll reread this tweet. Maxime Bernier says, quote, "Don't give me that whiny BS. You and I both know it's about the CPC having become a centrist party in order to replace the Liberals. You keep pandering to every special interest groups, dairy cartel, Islamists, radical feminists, and transgender activists. That's why I left." And so I think that it's interesting. It's interesting to note that instead of trying to actually have a debate, talk about why they think this is valuable, instead of silencing and removing the debate and saying this is absolutely abhorrent, right? It's not abhorrent. It's not. We need to have this conversation because gender dysphoria is a thing. And what you do when you are 18 and up is absolutely up to you. But there are concerning issues with regards to this, specifically in British Columbia, specifically about what Mr. Bernier is talking about, the BC father who can't refer to his daughter as a girl because he will be arrested for family violence. This is precedent being set in Canada by the Supreme Court. We should have our elected officials weigh in on it, and we should not have our elected officials trying to silence each other with ridiculous statements like delete your account. Here's another example, and MP Selena responds to this, but Maxime Bernier says, "Hurrah! Our caring and generous government is removing another major social inequity by solving the great menstrual products unavailability crisis of the early 21st century. How in the world were previous generations able to manage their lives without such help from Ottawa?" And this is a National Post article. "Liberals to make menstrual products free in federally regulated workplaces." Right, so I mean, what they're doing is mandating that employers who are federally regulated supply female menstrual products across the board, and that costs money, right? Like that costs, if you're federally regulated, potentially taxpayer money because you may be getting taxpayer benefits, et cetera, et cetera. There's a reason you comply. And so, I mean, do we need these socialist policies? There's a debate there. There's a debate to be had. The benefits and drawbacks of this policy, right? Instead, MP Selena, who's no longer a liberal, says, "Max, seriously, it's time to be quiet." No debate, no argument, no, this is why you should be quiet. There's no education, absolutely nothing. It's treated as though the idea is vile. And really, the communist, socialist ideas that everybody should get everything provided to them by the government is vile and leads to a very bad outcome for most people, unless you're an elite, unless you're in the government, unless you're somebody who knows somebody. And there are many examples of this through history. And this slippery slope is just that, using division to push these things. Oh, well, they need it. No, they've never needed it up until this point. And going forward, and it is not something that the government should be responsible for, to provide all of everybody's personal needs. My boss doesn't pay for any of my personal care items, not one. So why is this happening? And in what world is talking about it not okay? Really? Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out the People's Party of Canada. We've got count them, one federal party who is interested in actually having the hard conversations, actually looking critically at what our government is doing, the laws it's passing, and the ridiculous slippery slope that we're on, because people are getting on board, right? If you think that the Conservatives aren't on track to win at least, well, it looks like a minority at this point. Well, you're wrong. And is that what we want? It looks like that's what we currently have, right? The LibCon party working in tandem to push these ridiculous things. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out Maxime Bernier. Check out thepeoplespartyofcanada.ca. Have a wonderful day.